All right. Peace, collective. I know you've seen the title of this video. Super excited for this one. Feel like I say that every video. We're about to debunk evolution using the scientific method. This is a big thing because scientists like to use this as their creation story and call our history mythology, right? Our story, okay? Because they already got their story, that's his story, right? So we're learning our story and our science. And there's some good that we could take, and then there's some things we gotta leave. And that's what this is about, basically. Okay? So, the main event, Cosmic Sea versus Cosmic Soup. There's different types of evolution, and we're gonna have to break it down. But, there's Darwinian evolution, Neo-Darwinian evolution, okay? There's cosmic evolution, stellar planetary evolution, chemical evolution, organic evolution, micro and macro, okay? In the earlier parts of this series, if you're not familiar, like, share, subscribe, comment, okay? I already went over the first three, okay? We already debunked, because the cosmic evolution is just Big Bang, right? Stellar and planetary evolution goes all gravitational cosmology, which we already debunked using the scientific method. And chemical evolution, which we already went over chemistry. So we're going to skip these parts. We're going to go into organic evolution, which is what scientists call abiogenesis, okay? And we're going to go over micro and macro evolution. We're going to get into what those are and get into what we're going to keep, what we're not going to keep. Very simple. So, primordial soup. We'll get into that in a few. Organic evolution. Basically, Darwin himself, even in his own, if anyone studies his story, okay, he seen a bunch of finches, okay, and he assumed that since they were, alike, that they all came from a common ancestor. So, the idea of evolution begs the question of where we came from, no matter what. Even though scientists want to call it abiogenesis, oh, this is evolution, it's something else. It's a part of the story. It's even in the name, okay? Origin of species. And there's other things in the name which associate it with other things, and we can get into that later, all right? But basically, the premise is it takes millions of years, right? Or billions of years for things to evolve over time, gradually, right? And then naturally through, natural processes, field interactions that life itself organically can be created. And we're going to show that to a degree it's true and to the degree it's not true. So, off the bat, scientists will say things, right? They'll say things like, oh, we drilled into Greenland ice, we drilled into the ice in Antarctica, and it was 1 million year old ice, or it's this many million year old ice. And that's not always the case. That's actually not true at all. And we're going to prove that. We already proved that in the last video with pole shifts and how the whole Earth's climate changes, but let's go with other examples like this. Earth's largest lake became a desert in just 60 years. Okay, people, 60 years. It didn't take this lake millions of years to turn into a desert, right? So the idea that this place, the idea wherever you're at right now, the idea that it was like that a million years ago is an assumption, and it's not even scientific. Egypt was a rainforest 5,000 years ago. There's many examples of climate change, right? Because climate change is real. Climate change happens in cycles because the universe works in cycles, the earth works in cycles, okay? And nothing stays the same, all right? This idea that things remain the same over millions of years, that's not a scientific argument, okay? For people who are not familiar with the scientific method, there's 6 steps, okay? And one step is experimenting. right? So if they don't have experiments proving these things, by definition, it's pseudoscience. We'll get into that deeper. But as I was saying earlier, about things emerging organically, basically from the ether, right? Once you disturb the ether, these fields emerge, and from these fields and the fluctuations within the fields, like plasmas emerge, right? So plasmoids, basically, you could explain life from ether to plasmoid emerging, right? And the force that started the ether, that's the conversation, right? But you could show how life could basically emerge through what they would call nothing, which is basically the dielectric portal, which is the ether in a different state. Okay. That doesn't explain how life got started on Earth or how human beings got here. And that's the problem. The problem is you could say that we emerged from the ether, and that's like a true statement. You could say the universe emerged from there. You could even say like chemical compounds and organic elements, all these things could like form like on natural processes and create things like plasmoids and all that stuff. That happens. Okay, but that doesn't explain how like organic life within itself got started, like human beings, and the way our DNA is specifically set up, and the way the animals on this planet and certain things are set up. It doesn't explain all that, and we'll get into that further. But one of the experiments that was used to basically prove that it could happen here on Earth, which not a lot of scientists back anymore. Some people still use this experiment somehow. It was the Miller-Urey experiment, which some of the problems include they didn't use oxygen, right? They used gases like methane, ammonia, water vapor, hydrogen, right? And the reason they didn't use it is because things are basically oxidized, right? And the results, right, in the vials, right, the things that they came up with, right, the chemicals that were in there, 98% of those chemicals were toxic to life. Okay, so only 2% were the essential amino acids for life. Okay, and 98% of the rest of it was garbage. And that's why a lot of scientists don't even like to reference this experiment no more, because they know it wasn't really that much of a success. Moving on. So, basically, the idea or the premise is that the Earth at one time was like this hot, molten, like there were a lot of volcanoes, there was a lot of molten activity, and this is how like the land masses basically got formed on the Earth, right? Not only that, it actually formed the oceans and the atmosphere. Right? They actually say it created 80% of the land, including undersea, and gases from eruptions created the oceans and the atmosphere. Right? And they're saying this process happened over millions of years, and that's what eventually formed all these things and conditions on the Earth, which eventually made way for the conditions today. But we have direct contradicting evidence showing that this process wasn't millions of years, and it's something called radium polonium halos. Okay, and there's actually a book written on this. Okay, and the fact that these things exist and they exist so quickly, and they exist when they find these like fossils, they look into these rocks and stuff, that shouldn't exist. If what they're saying about the Earth being millions of years old and this molten Earth happened, this debunks that whole molten Earth theory. Okay, that's direct scientific evidence that that didn't happen. So we know that wasn't a fact. Right? So there wasn't no early volcanic type of Earth, right? So let's chalk that out. Everything we're doing here is based on the scientific method. If you cannot prove your point, you're out of here. Next, according to abiogenesis, according to scientists, according to evolutionists, it rained on rocks for millions of years. And that also created the oceans. And within these oceans, in turn to the primordial soup, which eventually beings, right? These singular organisms just emerged and somehow found food, somehow found someone to procreate with, and they eventually evolved into, I believe, Luca, right? We'll get into him, and then, you know, eventually over time, we became us, right? Um, that's crazy. Luca is basically like their, he's basically the granddaddy parasite, right? We'll get into that later. What I mean by that. But basically, right? You have Luca, and they basically say within this soup. So somehow rocks came alive, right? And then these rocks brought forth life that somehow came alive, right, or emerged. And another idea is that like asteroid, like there were things on the asteroid that came. There's I think at Stanford or someone or some university, they came out with an idea of what is it? It's cloud the ground lightning, possibly like an event like that could have jump started life somehow. But basically, they say that these multicellular beings evolved into like, you know, beings that are basically like fish, eventually like fish, and like these sea creatures, right? These sea monsters, and all these things, right? And then over time, these creatures like developed legs, developed arms, right, and started walking on land. And a big piece of their evidence, right, is whale skeletons. They say they have the whale evolution down pat, scientists, right? And they say, oh, the whale used to walk, stuff like that. Anyone could look at a whale fossil right now. They have legs, feet. Like, at no point where they walk, and no, they don't walk. They're whales. They have what looks like feet in their skeletons. No, they're whales. Just like bats, they look like they have hands, flying their wings. They're bats. The whale's the whale, right? So, according to them, eventually sea creatures came onto land, right? And there was already some type of vegetation. According to scientists, they're gonna say it wasn't big vegetation, but we know there was more oxygen because of the fossils they find, like amber, and they find that the oxygen level was higher. So there had to be giant things, right? And there are giant trees and plants, right? One is called the prototaxites, right, which are giant mushrooms. Mushrooms, according to some people's theories, including me, the whole fungi thing comes from other worlds, right? And it's like its own intelligence. It comes from another place. It's its own intelligence, and it's responsible for a lot of things on the earth. We're about to get into it, but there's a lot of theories and speculations even among scientists, which we're gonna get into, but even amongst some, we're gonna call it mystic minds. People already were fancying the idea that these particular entities, including stuff like marijuana, other psychedelics, animals, different things, some came from other places, right? So that is within like our story, right? We're talking about our story. We're talking about his story. Like that's an idea that's within our story, and there's evidence that that was part of our genetic splicing, and I'll get into that later, like the facts on that. But for now, we'll show the similarities, right? So giant mushrooms, right? So another key thing to think about, right, is the reason we have 21% oxygen now and not, what was it, like 35% they say back then, is because there was massive plant die-offs, right? So that's what they're saying. There were massive plant die-offs, right? So there were giant mushrooms, there's giant trees, there's giant plant vegetations, right? And then you have stories like Gilgamesh, right, where you have these people literally cutting down giant trees and stuff. So you have a story of cultivation going on, and this is the evidence to that. But this is how they're taking that evidence and they're using it for their story, right? So in their story, basically, the reason Earth's oxygen is lower now is because there were massive die-offs, which we agree on. We just think it's for a different, it happened in a different way. Okay, important to note that there's a lot of similarities in our theories too. Okay, so these are scientific articles. Everything that's a scientific article within this this particular series here, it's gonna be in the YouTube video description. If you're watching this as a reel, you could click the full YouTube video description. It's gonna be in that description. Click on that YouTube description. Click on the link. Go into the YouTube description. All the citations and links are gonna be there. So if you're seeing a clip or a reel and you see me saying, "Oh, like the links in the description," you don't see it. It's because it is in the description, but not the reel. Okay, just to make that clear for people if they didn't know. Okay, quick public service announcement. Right. So this is a scientific article. Right. Before trees, giant mushrooms ruled the earth. Right. And why is that important? Because soil without fungi is just dirt, and dirt doesn't create life. Okay, so when they talk about what came first, fungi had to come before certain things. So fungus creates a network of communication for all plant species on Earth. The fungus literally connects every plant on the whole planet. Every plant communicates and they're connected from the whole planet. From the undersea too. All that vegetation. Okay. So for the herbalists out there, for the people out there that are doing the gardening and stuff, doing that type of stuff, lick your seeds and allow them to ask the other plants for the nutrients that you need. Okay. So, study by microbiologists. See, get into scientists, right? This isn't opinions. Pedro Lopez Leo says the immune system developed because of fungi. Okay, so now we're seeing the similar connections because we're very similar to trees. Trees and human blood and trees is basically similar. Besides the iron in the middle and what they have, it's like the same thing. And we're actually even closer related to mushrooms and fungi, as far as on a genealogy wise, which you're gonna say is DNA wise, but we're gonna have a whole biology video, okay, to get into what they mean by all these terms. All right, but here's another scientific article. Okay, mushrooms are more like humans than plants at the genetic and chemical level. Okay, so humans were actually spliced with more than just Neanderthal and Denisovan. We'll get into that later. New mycologist theory says you're a mushroom having a human experience, and it kind of makes sense. The way and I'm not promoting these things, but at the same time, science is catching up, and even modern medicine is considering using psychedelic mushrooms as an actual medicine. Okay, because it is, and that doesn't mean I'm not saying go and take it. I'm not saying don't take it. I always tell people this is how I feel personally. If it's from the earth, I would take it. Right? If it's not from the earth, some type of pill or something like that, it's made in a lab, I wouldn't take it. And everything in moderation, because you can drink too much water and die. Right? So Too much of anything isn't good. Moving on. Dinosaur time. What are dinosaurs? Okay. According to scientists, dinosaurs were reptiles, right? And they eventually went extinct, and they like basically came back as like birds. And now, a lot of scientists are considering dinosaurs might have even been birds because they can't even tell. Here, I go with Mud Fossil University's theory, with dinosaurs are parasites from bigger beings, right? You could go watch his videos if you want a deeper dive on that. But basically, right now, I'm going to provide challenging evidence towards the timelines and the things they're saying in this evolution theory as far as the history of what's going on. Okay? Human bones disintegrate over time. This is a fact. So we're asking the question, why don't dinosaur bones and other fossils, why do they last millions of years, right? Like, what's the reason? Some of them turn into crude oils and stuff according to them, and other ones fossilized. So what's the reason? And they'll basically say because dinosaur bones were buried in mud or sand. And if you hear the bird in the background, sorry, if it bothers you. But there's something called mud fossils. And mud fossils are fossils that were preserved quickly. So it's not millions of years old. And all they need to do is be underwater and then within the mud, and that entraps them. And it preserves them really well. And we're going to see how that's evidence for us right now. Okay, so here's one example. 110 million year old, according to their timeline. 110 million year old fossilized Borealopelta mummy is so well preserved, it still has its intestines. Scientists believe it was swept to sea, landed on the ocean floor where it was preserved. That's a mud fossil, folks. It's not millions of years old. All fossils that are preserved, pretty much mud fossils. They're not millions of years old. Mud fossils are direct evidence that they're not. Okay? More evidence is carbon-14 found in dinosaur bones proves they are millions of years old. What do I mean? Radiocarbon dating only works for 50,000 years. That's all it's accurate for. Anything over that is not accurate. So if you're finding radiocarbon in a dinosaur bone, that means it's less than 50,000 years old, folks. Why didn't dinosaurs re-evolve after extinction? According to scientists, dinosaurs returned as giant birds instead of reptiles and mammals. To me, that sounds like a cop-out. Like, where's the scientific evidence? Like, they don't have no evidence for these claims. They're going to pull out what they call fossils. They're going to say this is this million years old, this is this million years old, and this is proof. And I'm about to demonstrate how that's not. Okay. So, one more question before I get into that. Let's look at this. Let's look at this T-Rex real quick. Okay. I don't know if this is bright enough. Yeah, let me turn up the brightness forward. Yeah, sorry if it wasn't bright enough before. Okay. See this guy right here? You see this guy? There's other examples, but how do they procreate? Explain this process, scientists. since y'all so goofy and y'all like on the Nature Channel, we always seeing some animals banging because y'all love that stuff because y'all perverts, right? So like, explain that one since y'all so fascinated with how animals do it, right? That's a good question. Look at the anatomy of this thing. Explain that to people. Like, explain that to the people. Like, show us how this is mounting something else with that big tail and the way it. How does it get back up? Or, right? Goofies. And it's so funny because like, you don't know what this being, right? Like, picture a you ever seen a hippo skull? Imagine what scientists would draw. Like, if we didn't know what a hippo looked like, imagine what they would draw. Like, look at this. Like, imagine what a hippo skull. Go Google a hippo skull if you don't know what it looks like. You don't know what this. And as scientists, Hollywood over there making dinosaur sounds, T-Rex. You think you know what this sounds like? You made that up. It's all made up. Literally. Okay. So, basically, how scientists date a lot of fossils, they're called index fossils, is that they look at the layer of sediment that they found it in, right? And they say this layer of sediment formed within this many millions of years. So, this has to be this many million years old, right? According to them. Also, to date the sediment, a lot of the time, scientists use the fossils they find to date the sediment rocks. They use the rocks to date the fossils and the fossils to date the rocks. Look this up. We're not making this up. Okay? So, how do these layers form? Well, it doesn't take millions and millions of years to form layers. And we could prove that. One example is hydrologic sorting, which basically you get something in a cup, shake it up, right? You get different densities, different materials of different densities, shake it up, and you watch the layers form instantly, right? And when we talk about the flood, that's what we're talking about. These layers formed over a massive catastrophic event. Okay? And the reason we have these fossils or things that are stone that are preserved are petrification, right? Mud fossils, right? We have vitrification, right, for the ice cold. And that's just scientific. Like, scientifically, you can't prove or you can't demonstrate any fossil that's millions of years old. Like, scientifically. Using the scientific method, right now there's things called rapid fossil makers. You can make a fossil quickly. That's demonstratable, repeatable, testable, observable, factual science, fitting under the scientific method that you could demonstrate. You could demonstrate petrification. You could demonstrate it. There's examples of people getting petrified before within like 14 years. The frogs getting petrified in Hawaii after those dew attacks, which they're not going to talk about. With the blue roofs. So there's a lot of things that are true that people are going to call you crazy about, but we already got the receipts, and that's why we're documenting it. So there's no excuses. There's no lies. You can lie, but we're going to call you out, and that's it. It is what it is. So another fun fact that people might not know. So these people, right, they're finding these fossils, right, and basically in the 1800s and all these things, and these people, they didn't have no testing methods at all. So the geologic column existed before carbon dating existed, before uranium dating existed, before any of these testing systems existed to even, prove or disprove what they're saying. They pulled out these wacky numbers from their heads. and then try to prove themselves right over time by trying to confirm these crazy numbers that they pulled out their butts, literally. And people roll with this stuff, and it's crazy because none of it's scientific. You can't prove anything that it is. You can't prove a fossil is millions and millions and millions of years old. You could assume that, but you can't scientifically prove it, and it's crazy. And the Smithsonian has already been caught covering up a lot of things, right? Like, for instance, they've been accused, right? There's claims that there were Egyptian artifacts in the Grand Canyon, right? And the Smithsonian's the one that's directly accused of covering that up, right? You have the Smithsonian Institute has sent mummies from the Americas, North America, South America. They sent mummies from the Americas to Europe before, right? Covering stuff up. There's been researchers that have gone, right, and sent stuff to the Smithsonian, right? They studied it, they sent it to the Smithsonian. They come back years later to go study that same thing again, and then the Smithsonian loses it. So losing artifacts and losing stuff and not talking about things and covering up, that's a big part of science. That's a big part of history, covering up stuff and fires and floods and Göbekli Tepe is they have to dig it up. That's a literal cover up. They're digging up all these places. They dug up Egypt. They dug up a lot of the South American and those pyramids, like in Mexico. They dug a bunch of these things up. There was a big cover up. So this isn't new. There's other things. There's archaeological hoaxes, right? You have a famous one is Darwin himself, right? The Piltman man, right? He claimed to find the missing link. It was a lie because that's what you have to do in science, right? You have to lie, right? Because you're not standing on no weight, right? So when you're doing pseudoscience, you're making stuff up, and we're going to prove later because of racist reasons, you're going to get called out. And people following this racist science still is crazy, and we're going to get into that a little bit. But other people, there's been many archaeological hoaxes, like even not even just archaeological, like another example is George Haeckel, right? Embryology. He drew people looking like fish and says, oh, people are like fish when they're embryos and they grow into looking like humans. No, they don't. He was proven wrong over 100 years ago. People still use this stuff. They say, oh, we don't use his pictures. They edited it a little bit. Corny. And we know that some fossils were actually created by stonemasons. And for the people who don't know, they don't know. And that's okay. Oh, you're making claims. Empty claims. Okay. That's cool. I'm about to show y'all all y'all empty claims. So, another problem is horse evolution. Here's another empty claim. They claim they had the whole horse evolution down pat. And let's show how that's a lie. And how that was debunked damn near like 70 years ago. Okay. Made up by Othniel C. Marsh, 1874. From fossils scattered across the world, not from the same location. So he didn't even use fossils he found from the same location. He bought a bunch of scattered ones like that and tried to make up some lie, right? Another example on why horse evolution is wrong is modern horses found in the same layers as ancient horses. So the fossils they're calling ancient horses, they find those fossils in the same layers as modern day horses. Yeah, this is millions and millions and millions of years old, and this isn't. No, your story is cat. And we could call it out. And I'm going to say all the good stuff too. We're going to get into it. What's real or what's not. So let's get into it. Radiocarbon dating. I said it earlier. It's only accurate up to 50,000 years. But there's other testing methods. So let's see. Radiometric uranium dating. Okay? This works. Uranium dating works. Geologists, when they're looking for oil, right, they could use uranium dating. They could use radiometric dating. And it works. okay? But the layers, they're assumed to be certain years, and we're gonna show how that's not the case, okay? So on this channel, we don't deny science. The radiometric dating works as far as if you want to find certain geological conditions. If you're trying to find something, there's certain tests that work. That doesn't mean that is that old, and we're gonna demonstrate that, okay? So it's a fact because they've already tested rocks and samples from known age, so they know the age of these samples. They test them, and then it says it's all these millions of years old. So it doesn't even work. So radiometric dating doesn't work for rock samples that they know the age of. They cannot predict the age of these things. But it's assumed to work for samples that they don't know the age of. Why? Why? Because it works as far as if you're looking for oil, you'll find it. So they're happy. And that goes back to the whole interpretation of data from the other videos. That's just the way they conduct science. It's very materialistic, and it hurts the earth, and it hurts people, and it's very sad. And they could stick on certain facts, and they try and say this proves that, which it really doesn't. Okay. So, one easy way to show that, because they'll say, oh, gold has to form under these conditions, right? But earthquakes turn quartz into gold. So certain frequencies, certain pressures, certain conditions could create these particular elements, including radioactive ones, right? Even though they're gonna say this has to be because of the half-lives, this has to be this year's this amount of age, and this. No, there's conditions and pressures, and that thing can change. And they're gonna say you could put it in space and it wouldn't change. You could change the conditions of that with the right environment and with the right field excitations and the right material. Okay, so it's all about pressures and conditions and where you're at. And to prove that volcanic ash dating isn't legitimate, so basically they don't test the rocks, right? So you can't test sediment and know the age, right? And you can't test the sediment and find the oil. So what they do is they test the volcanic ash, right? And they could find the right conditions. If I find the volcanic ash in this condition and I can find the oil, they could do that. But it doesn't tell you the age. And this is direct evidence, okay? So helium trapped in zircon is proof Earth isn't billions of years old. So zircon crystals are what they find in the volcanic ash. And helium being found in that is proof that it's not billions of years old. Right there. Okay? But science is going to say water erosion, right? So they're going to say, oh, that it's like a river, the Colorado River is what carved out the Grand Canyon and all these things. It takes millions of years. But we've demonstrated that it doesn't take millions of years to do these things. How that lakes could turn into deserts in 50, 60 years. And a bunch of this stuff is assumptions that don't even fit under the scientific method, which they claim to follow. And they're saying we don't. So we're about to get into some real science here. And let's start with geologist Dr. Andrew Snelling's 3-part series in Research Journal. Problems with the sediment layers at the Grand Canyon. Not a process of millions of years old. So anyone can look in the Research Journal. You know the link is going to be in the description. Okay, you can read it and you can see that he has evidence that it didn't take millions of years to form that Grand Canyon. And if you look at copper mines, that's a copper mine. Okay, there's no erosion marks between the layers or anything. So basically, it didn't rain for millions and millions and millions of years. It didn't rain at all. These people are not scientific. They're not. They just, you know what they do? They feed off of people who don't like study deeply a lot of topics. And so the problem is, like, some of us are really well versed in these conversations, right? I'm okay. Some other people okay. Some people are really well versed, And there's some people who just hear conspiracy theories and stuff, and then they didn't know it's true, but they don't really get into the science of it. And then those people are attacked. They're the ones that get clowned by these people because they went to school and they know some scientific facts. And they could use the equipment and they could use the mathematics and the equations, right? So they're basically in charge of the interpretation of how these things are displayed. And that's the problem, is that the intellectuals for the collective have to be in charge of keeping the facts without denying them, without denying the science, and also demonstrating that they lie about so much stuff. Because when you look at the science, it shows our ancestors are right, and our story is true, and his story is a lie. So that's why it's really important. So we're about to get into the Darwinism part of this again, aka micro and macro evolution. So this isn't my theory. Scientists even know about it, right? This is a scientific article. Why are big pieces of our evolutionary past still missing, with gaps going back 6 to 8 million years? Why, right? According to them, must be buried quickly in the right conditions to fossilize. So it takes certain conditions to make a fossil. So, you know, it has to be the right conditions or fossils won't appear. So that's like their reason that there's gaps in these, what they call, you know, geologic columns and like these evolutionary family trees and stuff like that. So they already have excuses for these things. So I'm not making a claim when I say there's gaps. They have explanations for these gaps. All right. So what is Darwinian evolution, right? Basically microevolution, right? Which eventually turns into macroevolution. So what is microevolution, right? Through natural selection, animals compete to adapt and survive. Variations in species. So variations in species is microevolution, which is a true fact. Okay, so the environment affects a being no matter what. That's scientific. You put a being in another environment, the field pressures, and we're going to interact with our environment. Things are going to happen over time. They try and use this as proof of macroevolution, which is basically saying that one species turns into a whole nother species, which is not scientific. It's never been demonstrated ever in history, and microevolution is their proof that it happens. But we're going to get into how that's not the case and it's not a fact. Okay, so within itself first, variations has limits, right? So you can't crossbreed a cat to be 60 feet, and if you could, you can't crossbreed a cat to be 600 feet. Okay, so there's like genetic limits. There's limitations to certain things. So there's variations, but there's limitations too, right? And that's stuff they don't really want to discuss. And it's very important to note that questioning evolution is very scientific. Take the scientific descent of Darwinism, for example, which is over 1,000 scientists and experts against lies in evolution. So we're not crossing a boundary when we say, oh, there's like problems here scientifically. There's scientists and experts already saying this. I'm just here showing the evidence that there's a lot going on here to unpackage. And if you're going to say this is not a religion and this is a scientific fact, then there's certain things you're going to have to prove. And if y'all think science doesn't prove things, you are going to have to go past that bar exam. You're going to have to go represent everybody that's in jail right now for a crime that forensics ultimately proved them doing. So, science proves things, okay? Stanford already put out that study, right? Bias and belief, right? They know people are going to stick to their beliefs even when presented contradicting evidence. So this is layers and layers of contradicting evidence, and I know some people aren't going to like it, and I don't care. I don't give a fuck. A lot of people have died over this stuff. A lot of people have been tortured, okay? A lot of people have been discriminated against. A lot of people have been killed. We talk about the earth has been damn near not destroyed, but we have really hurt the earth, okay? Animals, the way we treat animals, the damage that's been done is less than me saying a few hurtful words. So if I say fuck them, that's less than the damage that's been done. So, how about shut the fuck up, respectfully. Anyway, moving on. Natural selection, big part of microevolution. A study was conducted by Mike Lynch and his colleagues, right? And they basically published papers showing the net effect of natural selection is 0%. So if you want to debunk something, use science because it's fun as hell. So basically, the net effect of natural selection is 0%. Okay? And scientists actually have 80,000 generations worth of evolution. So scientists have been breeding E. coli for 80,000 generations. And by some scientific fact, because science is science, that E. coli has never turned into anything other than E. coli. And it's gonna stay E. coli until someone else names it something else, but it's still gonna be E. coli. We have the evidence. We have all the evidence. They don't have evidence. They have like stories and like theories, and we got some theories too, and we not scared to say it. And they're hiding behind science, and they're not even fully conducting it all the time. And that's pretty sad, right? Because you lying to people. I don't gotta lie here. Here's more contradicting evidence to the origin of life. Okay, Science is Wrong About the Origin of Life by Caroline Delbert. That's who wrote the article. Okay, and basically, scientists found that they have to readjust the order of the amino acids within the genetic code. So they aren't even right about the process of how DNA and all these things evolved. Then you have stuff like the Miller-Urey experiment that is like, you didn't even have the correct order of the amino acids to begin with. Here's more challenging evidence. Quantum Physics and the End of Naturalism by Bruce L. Gordon. And he makes the case that quantum physics directly disproves naturalism. Just through all the phenomena of quantum physics, which we already debunked, and we showed this field theory, and we showed that's the ancient science. So the ancient science debunks naturalism. Easy. Okay? That's direct proof. Alright? So, now that we've beat down microevolution a little bit, not everyone believes in Darwinian evolution as far as the way it was originally taught. There's something called Neo-Darwinism. That's the new stuff, right? And it basically integrates Darwin's theory of natural selection with Gregor Mendel's laws of genetics using mathematics. Let's go through what his laws are. Basically, the law of dominance, right? So in a pair of alleles, right, alleles, which is basically the same gene, right? Different versions of the same gene. One trait makes another. One's dominant and one's hidden. Then you have the law of segregation, right? Which they come in pairs. They come in separate pairs during gamete formation, which a gamete is basically a sex cell, right? And each sex cell only carries one allele, right? Or allele, however you want to call it. And then the last one is the law of independent assortment, which genes of different traits sort into gametes independently of one another. So, Neo-Darwinism combines Darwin's theory with this man's laws of genetics. But nowadays, every single law has been proven, that has been disproven. Okay? So what we know now is there's no dominant gene. Neither one is dominant. The traits are actually blended. Okay? And there's co-dominance, right? So both are expressed equally. There's not no one over the other. Okay? And the genes aren't independent. They're actually linked. Right? And they're linked very close together in a chromosome, which violates that whole law. So basically, to believe in Neo-Darwinism, you have to believe in things that have already been disproven and debunked using the scientific method. Like, people, it's not that hard. Like, literally, look. Beliefs, theories, or practices that are presented as scientific but lack the rigorous methodology, empirical evidence of testing of true science. Okay? So, if you're not fitting under the scientific method, this is pseudoscience. Okay? Very simple. Another problem is like traits, stuff like emotions and different things like that. It's called the misinheritability problem, right? Gaps in studies of heritability and genomes. And so scientists try and tackle these problems. The way they tackle it is mathematics based. So scientists focus on the math-based answers and ignore variables such as behavior and other elements. So scientists think they could just answer all these questions using math. That's like their scapegoat. It's just writing math equations and saying, this means that. So now, leave me alone. But we have a question. Okay? If all humans, we came from like one planet, we evolved, right? From these one beings, right? We evolved from these beings, right? We evolved from one place. Why aren't all blood types compatible? Explain that. Right? Because all cells start as stem cells, right? Then it takes the right condition, right? Epigenetics, we'll get into that deeper, right? In the biology part, right? So the cells, they start as stem cells, and the environment ultimately affects their condition, right? And then genes can basically mutate, right? So that's how the blood types, they say, oh, like that's like a gene mutation, right? Because your parents can have the same blood type, and they won't give birth. They'll give birth to you. You'll have a different blood type. And basically, they're saying that's like a good mutation somehow. Like if that's a mutation, that's a bad mutation. That's not a good mutation. To not be able to be compatible, that's not a good mutation. Okay, and mutations is such a foundation of the evolution theory, and it's not even good. There's no good mutations. Like a T-Rex used to be a chicken used to be a T-Rex. How is that evolution? That's de-evolution. How you go from an apex predator to not, and say that's not evolution? Say that's how do you say that's evolution when that's de-evolution? Right? So my challenge is name one good mutation. Scientists, whoever, intellectuals, people who are out there, just give me one good mutation. And if one of you uses a disease, like, oh, you get this disease, then it'll prevent this disease. One good mutation. A legitimate example. It's so bad that Stanford geneticists say humans are actually getting dumber, and it's because of genetic mutations. So how the fuck are we mutating and it's making us dumber, but that's evolution and we're getting better? Like, these people are literally bird brains, and there's so many trails of citations that are left behind that people could just collect. I'm collecting a bunch of them, and y'all can send more too, because we're collecting all of that here. We're not playing with these people. So what happened? How did we get to this point? Why do people even believe this stuff? Okay, basically, racism has been happening for a long time. The caste system, bunch of stuff. And basically, Anthropologists believe that European society was the highest form of society and every other race was savage. Okay, and that basically, that mindset is what helped form what people called eugenics. Okay, and eugenics led to eventually what the Nazis did, and we could get deeper into that because there's a lot, with the secret societies and the Antarctica stuff that they was doing. So that whole story, and we know the Holocaust, and like, listen, there's a lot of deep stuff within that conversation. But we know their science was led very eugenics based. Okay, and that was inspired by Britain and America and the slavery, all these things that was going on. Okay, so that's the birth of where this stuff came from, and that's like eventually what happened. So all these things, all these testings on people, all these things, that was all in the heart of the people who were basically not so great people. And basically, the problem with race is that it doesn't exist. And I already showed how every continent is connected in the Earth video. For people who didn't see that, go and check it out. And basically, it's a political thing. So white and black, these terms didn't even exist until the 1800s. So the whole idea of race and stuff, even phenotypes, like, we're going to get more into that later on, but phenotypes doesn't even prove jack squat, and we'll get into that later. So there's like this idea, right, that like these people are smarter than these people, right, and it's basically, it's based off this analytical perspective, and I'm gonna get into that, but we're gonna get into the bell curve real quick and how it inspired this type of nonsense. So there was a study conducted, and they took different races and they tested them, and they said these races are smarter than these races, this race is smarter than this race is smarter than this race, right? And so I have some questions about this. The first one is, who did they even test, right? So did we get a bunch of intellectuals from this race and then get a bunch of laymen from this race and who did we test, right? First. And then secondly, this was specifically IQ. Okay, we're gonna get into how intelligence and genius isn't specifically measured in just IQ. Okay, and I have a question. So if people are like so much smarter than these other people, right? Or like my ancestors, right? Like, y'all are so much smarter because y'all could cultivate and hurt the earth more, right? And make it look more aesthetically pleasing to human eyes or whatever, right? Since y'all so much more like smarter, why did they even feel the need to create the Jim Crow laws ever? Like in any type of country, if you're just so much smarter, right? Just so much more capable, why would you even need like an advantage in any way, right? Like, don't you already have the advantage? Like, you're such a genius, bro. You're so smart. Like, you know how to, you really know how to control. That's smart. That's smart, right? So let's get into what genius actually is. So for the gifted and talented kids, the federal education programs define genius kids who acquire differentiated educational programs or services beyond normally provided by regular school programs as the following 6 categories. Okay, pay attention. General intellectual ability, specific academic aptitude, IQ, creative or productive thinking, okay, leadership abilities, visual and performing arts, right, and psychomotor abilities, right, like telekinesis, different things like that, or clairs, all the clairs and stuff like that, right? All of those are considered geniuses and intelligences. And the bell curve didn't test for all these things, and they're gonna say they're smarter, and they didn't even test for 90% of the 80% of the stuff that defines genius and intellectuals, So they're fucking lying based on fake ass eugenic science because there's some devil ass fucking cowards that like to destroy the earth for monetary fucking gain. That's just a scientific fact that we could prove. And it hurts people's feelings that I use a few, oh my god, you're cursing. I don't curse people. I use profanity. I don't curse nobody. I don't need to curse these people. They don't want to get on that side of me. Trust. I've never had to curse nobody. Nobody wants to face my ancestors like that. Okay? Just thinking some negative shit about me is good enough to get your ass fucked up sometimes. So seriously. Anyway, I'm not really playing with these people when it comes to this video because they're basically trying to say because, people came out of Africa, then people evolved into these new, better species. And that's really what these people believe. And it's super racist. And they would treat my people just like they would treat, what they would call African or what they would call a black person, right? So I feel just as much as anyone else, when it comes to that. For people who can't get beyond the visual because of the eugenics and because of the phenotypes and because of the racist methodologies and crazy ass lies that they put in people's heads, Obama is related to the other presidents. Like when you could get that, like when you could get that genealogy, when you could get that 20 generations back, like your parents, and your grandparents, if you just count the parents, that's 20 generations back is over 1 million people. That doesn't include siblings. That doesn't include your parents' siblings. Yeah, this whole DNA test. You can't even tell. No one can tell. They can't even tell who your mother is unless they have their DNA. Okay, so I'll get deeper into that into the biology video as far as what people are looking. What are these markers and stuff? But people have been telling us some lies. Okay, and I'll get into that even deeper. So when Neanderthal was African, so when they first found Neanderthal, they consider him African because they're saying that people started in Africa, right? Then they evolved, and that over time, basically they banged a bunch of Neanderthals, and that's what created human beings, right? Even though Africans nowadays they don't have no Neanderthal DNA, right? So like his story isn't your story, right? So just because someone has Neanderthal DNA doesn't mean everyone has that shit, right? So when Neanderthal was African, he was dumb. That motherfucker couldn't do shit. He was a fucking monkey-ass monkey. And that's a fact. And then now that he's white, right? All of a sudden he's smart. Dude's building like these civilizations that the jade bracelets and jewelries and the tools and all this crazy stuff. Like, it's very easy to see when someone looks, but these chapters of history, they want to close them because they're scared to talk about it because now everybody's sensitive. But facts are facts. And we're breaking out all this. I'm not scared of none of these. I'm not scared of none of these things. Like, we're going to talk about it here. And it's just facts. It is what it is. And if it rubs you the wrong way, good. Remember earlier we were talking about they date the rocks using the fossils, and the fossils using the rocks. Well, Lucy, which is like their monkey god. So the monkey god, right? Like, oh, we all came from Lucy, right? They even made the movie Lucy, right? You only use 10% of your brain, and she was over there touching with the monkey, right? Lucy, they dated Lucy using strata. They don't even know how old that fossil is. They over there capping the people. Crazy lies. So let's get to how we got to this point, right? Like, where is this tone coming from now? So, scientists are gonna say we evolved from Neanderthals and Denisovans because we have Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. That's their literal proof. That's the proof, just because we have the DNA. That doesn't prove anything because, according to our history, we were genetically spliced. Human beings were spliced. We're not natural to this earth. Okay? And the first ones that were spliced were damn near giants. Okay? So, all those people that are talking about, we the originals, we this and that. Unless you 60 feet tall, bro, get out my face. All that craziness y'all talking about, that's more eugenic stuff. That's crazy. That I'm trying to get people out of that stuff so we can get into this real science, so we can see the science of the soul, and we can get out the vessel, and then we can see things clearly for what it is, and get outside these racist talking points that people got us in, that it's not even real. Even though it's real, like people really die every day. Like these things are really systematic. Stuff really happens, but it's these fake perceptual things that it doesn't exist outside of like people creating it. That's what I'm saying. And we can move forward in the future better. Like we don't have to keep doing this stuff. We gotta teach the youth differently, man. I'm very disappointed in how some adults act, and I could even question myself, since I'm always very critical of myself. So that's why the youth, you gotta mold the youth, and not in a authoritative way. I don't like when it's authoritative. I cannot do it. But anyways, so according to scientists, Africans, y'all should be offended when you hear this. A bunch of Africans migrated out of Africa and started banging on Neanderthals, started banging on Denisovans, and all types of monkeys, and that's how human beings came along. A bunch of interspecies sex. Literally, evolution is jack filled with interspecies sex. It's disgusting. And according to science, like a mule, for example, they're not even fertile. The offspring of interspecies is not fertile. And let's pretend it's fertile. We've never seen interspecies sex offspring become the dominant. We're at the top of the food chain, basically. Like, how that's just not even demonstratable, right? And they're gonna say, oh, humans are the example. That's putting the horse before the carriage. Petitio principi. Look that up. So scientists are basically gonna say more lies. This is a common lie that come out of people's mouths a lot, that they think it's an actual fact, but it's not. And the link's going to be in the description of the scientific study that shows this isn't my opinion. But scientists are going to say humans and chimps share 98% DNA. Lie. It's more like 80%. Okay. They say 98 because they want to be dramatic and they want to make the numbers fit their story, but that's not the case. Okay. And another thing that goes against evolution is that there's low genetic diversity within human beings, which goes against long periods of human evolution. Like, why is there such low genetic diversity? If it's taking all this time to evolve, there should be all these things. Like, why is there so low diversity, right? Over these long periods. So, if Neanderthals aren't monkeys and all these things, then what are they? What is it then, right? Like, what is it? Neanderthals are just the pygmies, the little people. Neanderthals are the little people. Okay, they were like 5'1", they're just little people. When you talk about the little people fighting the blue people, or the little people fighting the big people, the giants, the Neanderthals, they were fighting the giants, the Denisovans. Okay, so the Denisovans are the giants. Okay, take Dragon Man for example, and his big ass skulls and his bones and stuff. To bigger human beings like the giants, right? So the Nephilim, that stuff like that, or the pygmies, the little people. When the ancestors are talking about that, that's the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. Okay, and we were directly spliced with them too. All right, that over time, like certain things happen, like matings, or like there's different reasons why that DNA got into our system, right? Splicing, the mating happened, but the offspring, it's a little funny on that one. It's not gonna be, but direct evidence that we know that evolution that happens, that there's low genetic diversity in Denisovans and Neanderthals too. So there's low genetic diversity in humans, Neanderthals, Denisovans, over these long stretches. Like Neanderthals existed for 350,000 years, and so did Denisovans. And you have a low genetic diversity. They said scientists say like, oh, Neanderthals traveled in like groups of 20 or 30 and stuff. There was such low genetic diversity, like groups of 20 and 30, and then they end up being human beings over this meeting human beings that we become like what? So how do we know that we were spliced? It's called chromosome 2. Okay, and chromosome 2 in humans was taken out and fused. That's why we have shorter telomeres. Okay, that's why the center one, there's like a center telomere. It's supposed to be like a bottom one, but it looks like it's like not right. It's like not completely there. It was like edited, right? Like messed up. So human beings, we didn't evolve from monkeys. Okay, the evidence for fossils, all these things, they paint a different story than what scientists are talking about, and we could directly prove that. Okay, we could prove that with the human brain, right? How it doubled the size according to them 2 million years ago. So if we were monkeys, how did our brains just double in size, right? And then the human brain hasn't aged, developed, or evolved in 200,000 years since, according to them. That's 2 million years, right? And then 200,000 years after that, right? So 2 million years ago it got bigger, and then 200,000 years ago it just stopped developing, right? Why? Right? Like why have sharks not evolved in 300 million years, or crocodiles, or dragonflies, or all these examples of different fossilized creatures that they find the same, not even evolved? So that was part 1 of debunking evolution using the scientific method and asking questions, getting into the deeper discussions on what's going on. So we know that it was created through racist lenses, right? So in the next videos, we're gonna get into like some of the tools and some of the geologic discoveries and locations and things that kind of debunk these narratives of these timelines, okay? And then there's going to be a 3-parter. So the video after that is going to be talking about a little bit about like DNA and different cultures around the earth and like how they're connected, and how like the connection actually debunks a lot of the stories and the narratives of their history, and how these people were here, this, and all these things happen. Like no, like we're going to show the connections from early, and it's going to debunk their whole timelines. So we just have to get through the beginning parts, right? The abiogenesis and the microevolutions, right? Get through the Neanderthals and monkeys to really start digging more deeper. So to the collective, I appreciate everybody for always tuning into my videos and giving me likes and sharing it. And to the people who message me, thank you. To the people who tune in all the time and watch, thank you. Wherever you're at, hope you're having a beautiful day or night. I already explained what the next video is going to be. Anyone who wants the custom gear, you already know. Did it here first. Got more inventions on the way. Man, it's good summer. It's going to be really hot. So guys, it's going to be really hot, and it's a good thing. We're in the new transition. So enjoy it. A lot of DNA changes. I covered that in the biology video. But anyway, I think I'll run up your time enough for today. That's how you debunk evolution. Peace.